It was the middle of July when I walked in on my wife, Sarah, crying at the kitchen table. Not the kind of cry you can brush off with a joke or a hug, this was the ugly, shaking, snot-covered kind of cry. Her head was buried in her hands, her shoulders trembling, and for a split second, I thought something terrible had happened. Maybe someone died. "What's wrong?" I asked, walking over to her. I kept my voice calm, though something in my gut was already screaming that whatever this was, it was about to change everything. She didn't answer right away. Just sat there, shaking, refusing to look up at me. That was when I knew this wasn't about anyone else. This was about us. I pulled out a chair, sat down across from her. "Sarah," I said, a little firmer now. "Talk to me." And then, through all the sobs and shaking, she finally said something. I'm so sorry." I stared at her. Sorry for what? It felt like forever before she finally lifted her head, her red, puffy eyes meeting mine. She looked broken. Like someone had gutted her from the inside out. "I've been seeing someone else," she whispered. There it was. Like a punch to the face, those 5 words knocked the air out of my lungs. My head started spinning, and I had to grip the edge of the table just to keep from falling off the chair. I didn't say anything. What the hell could I say? In that moment, it was like my brain short-circuited. Sarah, my wife, the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world, had just admitted to betraying me. But it wasn't just anyone she'd been sleeping with. "It's Michael," she added quietly. "Your brother." At that point, it wasn't just the air leaving my lungs. It was like the entire world around me collapsed in on itself. When she said it was Michael, my brother, something inside me snapped. You know how people always say they see red when they're angry? That wasn't it. It was like everything went blank. I could still hear her talking, but the words didn't register. Her voice faded into background noise, like a buzzing in my ear, while my mind tried to process the fact that not only had she cheated, but she did it with him. My brother. I pushed the chair back with a loud screech, stood up, and walked out of the kitchen. I didn't slam the door, didn't yell, nothing. I just walked upstairs to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. How long had it been going on? When did it start? Every question raced through my mind, but I couldn't focus on any of them long enough to find answers. The betrayal hit me harder than I expected, but it wasn't just because of Sarah. It was Michael. My little brother. The one person in my life who was supposed to have my back no matter what. We grew up together, shared the same room, played the same stupid video games for hours until Mom had to come in and yell at us to go to bed. He was my best friend before I even knew what that word meant. And now, he was the one behind all this. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, Sarah came upstairs. She stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. "Please say something," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word. "Something?" I repeated, my voice flat. "What do you want me to say, Sarah? What am I supposed to say to this?" I looked up at her, and all I saw was the person who ruined everything. I couldn't even see her as my wife anymore, just the woman who tore apart everything I thought I had. She stepped inside, wringing her hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It just..." "Stop." I cut her off. I didn't want to hear any more excuses or half-baked explanations. None of it would matter. "I don't care how it happened, Sarah. You slept with my brother. That's all I need to know." She flinched like I'd hit her, but I couldn't find it in myself to care. My emotions were all over the place, but the one that stood out, more than the hurt or the betrayal, was anger. And it wasn't even all directed at her. A lot of it was aimed at myself. How the hell did I not see this coming? Looking back, there were signs. There always are. You just don't see them until it's too late. The way Sarah started pulling away from me about 6 months ago, how she'd suddenly get all jumpy if her phone buzzed when we were together. I thought she was just stressed with work. She'd been taking on more clients, doing more late nights, and I figured she was just overwhelmed. I even offered to take her on a vacation, somewhere to unwind, but she'd shot the idea down. Said she couldn't afford to take time off. I believed her because why wouldn't I? Now it all made sense. The weird, awkward silences when we'd visit Michael and his girlfriend, Amy. The way Sarah would sit next to him, laugh a little too hard at his jokes. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now? Every little thing felt like a giant neon sign pointing to the obvious. I'd just been too stupid to see it. Sarah was still standing there, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to keep from falling apart. "It's over," she said, her voice cracking. "It's been over for months." I couldn't help it. I laughed. It was a sharp, bitter sound that echoed in the room. "Over for months?" I repeated, shaking my head. "And I'm supposed to feel better about that? You think because you ended it that somehow makes it okay?" "No," she said quickly. "I don't expect you to feel better. I didn't know how to tell you." "You didn't know how to tell me you were screwing my brother," I said, my voice low, full of venom. "How considerate of you." "I'm sorry," she said again, like it was some kind of magic word that could erase everything. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I snapped, standing up. "You did. You both did." She started crying again, but I couldn't stand there and watch her fall apart like she was the victim in all of this. I didn't care if she was sorry. She wasn't the one who had to live with this now. She wasn't the one who had to figure out how to face her family, her friends, her brother. I was. I grabbed my keys from the dresser and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" she asked, panic rising in her voice. "Away from here," I muttered. "I can't be around you right now." I didn't wait for her to respond. I was out the door and in my car within seconds, the engine roaring to life as I pulled out of the driveway. I didn't know where I was going, just that I couldn't be in that house, couldn't be near her, not right now. My head was spinning, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my mind replaying her words over and over like some kind of cruel joke. Michael. She'd cheated with Michael. I had to pull over eventually. The emotions hit me all at once, like a tidal wave crashing down. I slammed my fist into the steering wheel, yelling at the top of my lungs like it would somehow make me feel better. But it didn't. Nothing would make this better. When I finally calmed down enough to think straight, I did what I probably should have done in the first place. I called Michael. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey, man," he said casually, like everything was normal. Like nothing was wrong. The sound of his voice made my blood boil. "I know," I said, my voice low, barely keeping the rage in check. "I know about you and Sarah." There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, but he didn't say anything. Didn't even try to deny it. "Nothing to say?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "Look," he finally said, his voice careful. "It was a mistake. It shouldn't have happened." "Don't give me that mistake bullshit," I snapped. "You slept with my wife, Michael. You knew exactly what you were doing." "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said quickly, like that was supposed to make it better. "It just happened. You don't accidentally sleep with someone," I growled. "Especially not your brother's wife." He sighed heavily on the other end, and for a moment, I thought he might hang up. But he didn't. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't want to hurt you, man." "Well, you did," I spat. "Congratulations." Another long silence. I could hear him trying to figure out what to say, but there was nothing that would make this better. Nothing he could say that would erase the fact that he'd stabbed me in the back. "I'm gonna fix this," he said, like he had some grand plan to make it all go away. "Fix it?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You can't fix this, Michael. It's done. You and Sarah, you ruined everything." He started to say something else, but I didn't give him the chance. I hung up, tossing my phone onto the passenger seat and gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I didn't know what to do, where to go from here. My marriage was over. My relationship with my brother was over. And I didn't have a clue how to handle any of it. I sat in that car for what felt like hours, just staring out the windshield, my mind a chaotic mess. The betrayal was like a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. I kept replaying every moment from the last year, trying to pinpoint when things started going wrong. Was it my fault? Had I driven Sarah to this? Was I too absent, too focused on work to notice that she was slipping away? But then I shook my head. No. This wasn't on me. This was on them. They made the choice to betray me. To ruin everything we'd built. And now, I had to figure out what the hell I was going to do about it. I don't remember how long I stayed out after that call with Michael. Maybe an hour. Maybe 3. Time didn't seem real anymore. All I knew was that I couldn't avoid going home forever, as much as I wanted to. Sarah was waiting, and there were things that needed to be said, no matter how ugly, no matter how painful. I wasn't going to sleep in the car, and I wasn't going to let her sit in that house like nothing had happened. She owed me answers. When I pulled back into the driveway, the house looked different. Not physically, obviously. But it felt smaller, more suffocating, like the place I'd once called home had turned into something else entirely. I sat in the car for a few minutes, staring at the front door, knowing what was waiting for me inside. Knowing that once I walked through that door, there was no going back. I wasn't going to be the same after this. Eventually, I got out of the car, slammed the door harder than necessary, and made my way up the steps. I had no idea how this was going to play out. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to smash something, to make her feel even a fraction of the rage that was boiling inside me. Another part of me just wanted to walk in, grab a bag, and disappear without another word. Maybe both. Maybe neither. I couldn't predict what would happen, and I didn't care to. When I opened the door, Sarah was sitting on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, staring at the floor like it held the answers to all of life's problems. She didn't look up when I entered. Maybe she was afraid of what she'd see in my face. Maybe she just didn't know how to face me anymore. "Talk," I said, my voice cold, cutting through the silence like a knife. She flinched but didn't look up. Her hands trembled as she wrung them together, her knuckles turning white. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You had no problem talking when you were screwing my brother," I shot back, my words dripping with venom. "So why don't you start there?" That finally got her to look at me. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy from crying, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Not right now. Not after what she'd done. "I'm sorry," she said for what felt like the millionth time, her voice breaking. "I didn't want this to happen." "Stop saying you didn't want it to happen," I yelled, my voice echoing in the room. "You didn't just trip and fall onto him, Sarah. You made a choice. You kept making choices. So don't act like this was some accident." She started crying again, and normally, that would have gotten to me. Normally, I would have wanted to comfort her, to make her feel better. But not now. Now, I was too angry, too betrayed. I watched her cry, and it felt like watching a stranger. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I married, wasn't sitting in front of me anymore. This was someone else entirely. "How long?" I asked, my voice flat. She blinked through her tears, looking confused. "How long? How long has this been going on?" I clarified, my hands balled into fists at my sides. "How long have you been screwing him behind my back?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again, like she was trying to figure out how much to tell me. "A few months," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A few months," I repeated, shaking my head. "And when exactly were you planning to tell me, Sarah? Were you ever going to tell me? Or was this just supposed to be some dirty little secret you kept until you got bored of him?" "I was going to tell you," she insisted, but her voice didn't have much conviction. I just. I didn't know how. I didn't want to hurt you. I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that made her flinch again. You didn't want to hurt me? I repeated, disbelief coloring my words. Are you serious right now? You're saying this after months of lying to my face, sleeping with my brother, and you didn't want to hurt me? She started crying harder, her hands flying up to cover her face, but I couldn't let her tears get to me. I wasn't going to let her play the victim here. She didn't get to cry her way out of this. Why? I demanded, my voice rising again. Why him, Sarah? Why my brother? Of all the people in the world, why the hell did it have to be him? She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face twisted in misery. I don't know, she sobbed. It just happened. He was there, and I. No, I cut her off. Don't give me that "it just happened" crap. It doesn't just happen. You made a decision. You kept making decisions every time you saw him, every time you talked to him. So don't sit there and act like you didn't have control over any of this. I'm sorry, she whispered again, shaking her head. I didn't mean for it to go this far. That doesn't change a damn thing, I snapped, pacing the room now, trying to keep my hands from shaking with anger. You knew what you were doing. You knew what it would do to me. And you did it anyway. She didn't argue with that. What could she say? She knew I was right. How many times? I asked, the words burning in my throat. How many times did you sleep with him? She looked away, her silence answering the question better than words could. I stopped pacing, turning to face her. Tell me, I demanded. How many times? A few, she whispered, her voice barely audible. A few, I repeated, the anger boiling over again. And what the hell does that mean, Sarah? Once? Twice? 10 times? How many? I don't know, she cried, her voice breaking. I don't know, okay? I lost count. That hit me like a punch to the gut. Lost count. She'd lost count of how many times she slept with my brother. The rage I felt was so intense, I had to turn away from her, my fists clenched so tight I thought I might break something. I couldn't believe this was happening. Couldn't believe this was my life now. And what about Michael? I asked after a long, tense silence. Does Amy know? Sarah shook her head. No. No one knows. We didn't want anyone to find out. Well, too bad, I said, my voice cold. Because now everyone's going to know. You don't get to hide this anymore. She looked up at me, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. Please, she whispered. Please don't tell anyone. I'm telling Amy, I interrupted, cutting her off. She deserves to know what kind of person she's married to. But that'll destroy them, Sarah said, her voice desperate. Please, don't. Destroy them? I repeated, incredulous. What about me, Sarah? You've already destroyed my marriage, my family. And now you want me to keep this secret to protect him? I don't want to protect him, she said quickly, shaking her head. I don't want this to ruin everything. It's already ruined, I said, my voice flat. You ruined it the second you decided to sleep with him. Her tears started up again, but I couldn't stay there. I couldn't sit and watch her cry, listen to her beg for forgiveness that I didn't have to give. The betrayal was too deep, too fresh, and all I felt was anger. Rage. Betrayal. Hurt. I needed to get out of there before I did something I'd regret. I'm leaving, I said, grabbing my keys again. I'll be back for my things later. Please don't go, she begged, standing up from the couch, her hands reaching out toward me. We can fix this. I stopped at the door, my back to her. No, we can't, I said, my voice hard. You can't fix this, Sarah. You and Michael destroyed it. I love you, she whispered, her voice cracking. I turned to look at her, my face cold and emotionless. No, you don't. If you loved me, this wouldn't have happened. I walked out the door, slamming it behind me, the sound echoing in my ears as I got into my car and drove away. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't be there. Not anymore. Driving around aimlessly wasn't getting me anywhere. I must have circled the same blocks 5 or 6 times, the streets all blending together, but I couldn't turn my mind off. My hands were still shaking from the confrontation with Sarah, and every time I blinked, I saw her face, the way she looked at me, crying and pathetic, begging for forgiveness she didn't deserve. She'd already shown me exactly how much she valued our marriage, and now, she expected me to fix it? Not a chance. I pulled into a parking lot and killed the engine, sitting in silence. My heart was still pounding, my head spinning with every possible scenario of what to do next. Part of me just wanted to disappear, leave everything behind and never look back. But the other part? The part that was louder and more insistent? That part wanted revenge. It wasn't enough for Sarah to be sorry, she needed to pay. She and Michael had both made their choices, and I wasn't going to be the only one suffering the consequences. I grabbed my phone from the passenger seat and stared at it for a long time. I could see the notifications, missed calls from Sarah, texts I hadn't bothered to open. I ignored them all and scrolled through my contacts until I found Amy's name. Michael's wife. Amy had no idea what was happening behind her back, and while that might have been the easier option for everyone else, it wasn't going to stay that way. She deserved to know. She needed to know. My thumb hovered over her number for a few seconds, and then I pressed call. It rang twice before she picked up. Hey, she answered, her voice light and cheerful. What's up? You okay? She had no idea. My mouth was dry, and for a moment, I didn't know how to start. How do you drop a bomb like this on someone who's completely oblivious? Can we meet up? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause on her end. Sure. What's going on? I swallowed hard. I'll tell you in person. It's about Michael. Another pause. This time, longer. Okay. Where do you want to meet? I gave her the name of a bar across town, far enough from our neighborhood that we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. It was quiet, dimly lit, and out of the way. The kind of place people went when they didn't want to be found. All right, she said, though I could hear the hesitation in her voice. I'll see you in 30. The call ended, and I sat there for a few minutes, staring at the screen, wondering how the hell we got here. Wondering if I was about to ruin her life the same way mine had been ruined. But then I reminded myself, I wasn't the one who did this. Sarah and Michael had already done the damage. I was just showing Amy the reality of her situation. And she needed to see it. I threw the car in gear and headed to the bar. When I got there, Amy was already sitting at a booth in the corner, her purse on the seat beside her, nursing a glass of wine. She looked up when I walked in, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She could tell something was off. I slid into the seat across from her, avoiding eye contact for a second while I figured out how to start this conversation. I didn't want to drag it out, didn't want to make it more painful than it had to be. But there was no easy way to do it. You're scaring me, she said, her voice quiet but firm. What's going on? What happened with Michael? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the truth pressing down on me. It's about Michael and Sarah, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. They've been seeing each other. She blinked, confusion crossing her face. Seeing each other? What do you mean? I forced myself to look her in the eyes, and it hit me how much this was going to hurt. They've been having an affair, Amy. 4 months. For a second, she just sat there, staring at me like she hadn't processed what I said. Then, slowly, she shook her head, her voice a whisper. No. That's not possible. Michael wouldn't. I wish I was making it up, I interrupted, my voice harder than I meant it to be. But I'm not. I found out today. Sarah just admitted it. Her eyes searched my face, looking for any sign that this was some kind of sick joke. But when she didn't find one, her expression shifted from confusion to shock, then to anger. "You're serious," she said, more to herself than to me. "Oh my God, you're serious?" I nodded, feeling my stomach churn. "I'm sorry." She let out a shaky breath and leaned back against the booth, staring at her glass of wine like it held the answers to everything. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I said, though I knew it didn't help. There wasn't much to say in a moment like this. She was quiet for a long time, her hands gripping the stem of her wineglass so hard I thought it might shatter. I watched as she swallowed hard, fighting back whatever emotions were threatening to break through. "How long?" she finally asked, her voice low. "A few months," I said, keeping my voice even. "At least, that's what Sarah told me." Her lips tightened, and she nodded slowly, like she was trying to wrap her head around the timeline. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, trying to match up the pieces, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. She'd probably never get a real answer, just like I wouldn't. "You're sure?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper now. "I mean, are you absolutely sure? I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." She closed her eyes and let out a long, shaky breath, her hands trembling as she set the glass down on the table. "I can't believe this," she whispered, more to herself than to me. I can't believe it." "I know," I said, though those words felt hollow. I didn't know. I didn't know how she felt, and I didn't pretend to. But I understood the shock. The betrayal. The absolute wreckage that followed. We sat there in silence for a while, neither of us knowing what to say. What was there to say? The people we trusted most had ripped our lives apart, and now we were left to pick up the pieces. "I want a divorce," she finally said, her voice hard. "I don't care what he says, I'm done." "I don't blame you," I replied. "I don't think I can stay with Sarah either." Amy stared at her glass again, then let out a bitter laugh. "God, I'm such an idiot. I should have seen this coming. All those late nights at work, the weird excuses. I just didn't want to believe it." "You're not an idiot," I said firmly. "You trusted him. You loved him. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes him an asshole." She didn't respond to that, just shook her head slowly, her eyes fixed on the table. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she admitted quietly. I can't face him right now." "You don't have to," I said. "Not until you're ready." She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with tears she was trying to hold back. "Thank you," she whispered. "For telling me. I know it couldn't have been easy." "No, it wasn't," I admitted. "But you deserved to know." She nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. "I should go. I need to. I don't know. I need to figure things out." "I get it," I said. "Take your time. If you need anything, I'll call," she finished for me, standing up from the booth and grabbing her purse. She looked at me one last time, and there was something in her eyes that I couldn't quite place. Not anger, not sadness. Just resignation. "Good luck." "You too," I replied, watching as she walked out of the bar, her head held high despite everything. Once she was gone, I leaned back in the booth, feeling like the wind had been knocked out of me. Telling her had been harder than I thought. Watching the realization dawn on her face, seeing the heartbreak in her eyes, it brought everything crashing down on me again. My brother had destroyed her, just like he'd destroyed me. And there was no coming back from that. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Sarah and Michael were going to pay for what they did. This was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up early. I hadn't slept much, maybe an hour or two, if that. My body was exhausted, but my mind? My mind was running on pure adrenaline, fueled by the thoughts of what I needed to do next. It wasn't just about Sarah anymore. No, Sarah was part of the mess, but she wasn't the one who needed to feel the full force of my anger. That was reserved for Michael. I spent the night thinking about what he did, how he betrayed me, how he had the nerve to act like it was just a mistake. A mistake. That's what he had called it. Like it was some kind of minor slip-up, something you could brush off with a half-assed apology. As if screwing his own brother's wife could ever be written off as an error in judgment. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Michael wasn't going to get away with this. I wasn't going to let him crawl back into his perfect little life, pretending nothing happened. He needed to know what it felt like to lose everything, the way I was losing everything because of him. He needed to understand that this wasn't something he could walk away from unscathed. Not this time. I checked my phone. Nothing from Amy yet, which wasn't surprising. She probably needed time to process what I told her, to decide how to handle it. But that was her fight. I had my own battle to face, and that meant dealing with Michael. I got up, splashed some water on my face, and stared at myself in the mirror. I didn't recognize the guy looking back at me anymore. The dark circles under my eyes, the tension in my jaw, the look of someone who was barely holding it together, that wasn't me. At least, it hadn't been before all this. Now, I didn't know who I was. But one thing was for sure, I wasn't about to sit back and let this happen without consequences. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. My first stop was the one place I knew Michael would be, his gym. He had a regular routine, the kind of guy who never missed a workout. He'd be there, hitting the weights, acting like everything was just fine, like he hadn't just destroyed his brother's life. The drive to the gym felt like it took forever, even though it was only 10 minutes away. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, but I didn't care. All I could think about was the confrontation. About how I was going to make him face what he'd done. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw his car parked right near the entrance. Typical Michael always had to be front and center. I parked further away, taking a moment to collect myself before stepping out of the car. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say, everything I wanted to do. I walked into the gym, nodding at the girl behind the counter who barely looked up from her phone. I knew exactly where to find him. Upstairs, in the free weights section, where he spent most of his time trying to keep up the image of a guy who had it all together. Sure enough, there he was, doing curls in front of the mirror, his face set in concentration like he was preparing for a fitness competition. He didn't see me coming, not until I was standing right behind him. Michael. He froze, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. For a second, he didn't move, like he wasn't sure if I was real or just a product of his guilty conscience. Then he turned around slowly, lowering the weights to the ground. "Hey, man," he said, his voice cautious, like he knew this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. "Listen, Shut up," I cut him off, my voice low but deadly. "You don't get to talk right now." He swallowed, glancing around the room. The gym was mostly empty, save for a couple of people on the treadmills. He knew exactly what this was about, but he wasn't going to be able to weasel his way out of it. "You think this is over?" I said, stepping closer to him, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "You think you can just apologize and everything goes back to normal?" "I didn't," he started, but I cut him off again. "You ruined everything, Michael. You took the one thing I had, the one person I trusted, and you fucked her. My wife." I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, barely able to contain it. "And now you want to stand here and act like it's no big deal? Like we can just sweep it under the rug and move on?" His face was pale, and for once, Michael didn't have anything to say. He knew he was screwed, and there was no way out. "It was a mistake," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. Stop calling it a mistake." I snarled, my fists clenched at my sides. "You don't accidentally screw your brother's wife. You knew exactly what you were doing, every single time." He flinched at that, his eyes darting around again, probably hoping someone would come over and break this up. But no one was paying attention. It was just me and him. "I don't know what to say," he muttered, looking down at the floor. "You don't need to say anything," I replied, my voice cold. "You're done. Do you understand that? Everything you've built, your perfect little life with Amy, it's over. She knows. That got his attention. His eyes snapped up to meet mine, panic flashing across his face. What do you mean, she knows? I told her last night, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. She knows everything. And trust me, she's not sticking around. For the first time, Michael looked genuinely scared. I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to figure out how to fix this, how to salvage the mess he'd made. But there was no fixing this. No coming back from what he'd done. Look, he said, his voice desperate now, I'll talk to her. I'll explain. You're not talking your way out of this one, I said, cutting him off again. She's filing for divorce, and I'm helping her make sure you lose everything. Your house, your money, whatever you think you have left. It's gone. He stared at me, wide-eyed, like a deer caught in the headlights. He hadn't expected this. He thought he could get away with it, thought he could smooth things over, maybe apologize and move on. But not this time. You're my brother, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You were supposed to have my back, no matter what. And you betrayed me. You betrayed your wife. You betrayed everyone who trusted you. I didn't mean, he started, but I wasn't interested in hearing his excuses anymore. You're a coward, I spat, stepping even closer to him, so close I could see the fear in his eyes. And you're going to pay for what you did. For a second, I thought he might say something, might try to defend himself. But he didn't. He just stood there, looking like the pathetic piece of shit he was, knowing there was nothing he could say that would make this better. Stay away from me, I said, my voice deadly calm. Stay away from Amy. And stay the hell away from my life. If I ever see you again, I swear to God, I'll make sure you regret it. He didn't say a word. Just nodded, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly at his sides. I could tell he wanted to say something, but he knew better. He knew there was no point. I turned and walked out of the gym without looking back. My heart was still pounding, my blood still boiling with rage, but for the first time since this all started, I felt like I had some control. I wasn't going to let Michael or Sarah walk away from this unscathed. They were going to pay for what they did. Both of them. I drove back home, my mind racing with everything that had happened. The confrontation with Michael was just the beginning. I wasn't done yet. I still had Sarah to deal with, and there was no way I was going to let her off the hook easily. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked quiet. Sarah's car was still parked in the same spot, and for a moment, I wondered if she'd even left the house since I walked out the night before. Probably not. She was probably sitting inside, waiting for me to come back, hoping for a chance to talk. To fix things. But there was no fixing this. I walked inside, the door creaking slightly as I pushed it open. The house was eerily quiet, like it was holding its breath, waiting for the next explosion. I found Sarah in the living room, curled up on the couch, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked up when I walked in, and for a second, we just stared at each other. I talked to Michael, I said, my voice flat. Her face fell, the hope in her eyes fading as she realized this wasn't going to end the way she wanted. What did he say? She asked quietly. I shrugged. Doesn't matter. He knows it's over. And you should too. Her lip trembled, but she didn't say anything. She knew. Deep down, she knew. I'm filing for divorce, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. And I'm going to make sure you don't get a damn thing. The color drained from her face, her hands shaking as she tried to process what I was saying. You don't mean that, she whispered. We can. There's no we anymore, Sarah, I cut her off, my voice hard. You made sure of that. She started crying again, her body shaking with sobs, but I didn't care. I was done caring. I watched Sarah as she fell apart in front of me, her body shaking with the kind of sobs that might have affected me once. But not now. Not anymore. My patience, my sympathy, they'd been burned away by the betrayal. She had taken everything I believed in and shattered it. And no amount of tears was going to fix that. She didn't even try to get up from the couch. She just sat there, face buried in her hands, gasping between sobs. For a second, I stood there watching, waiting for her to say something, to explain, to try to claw her way out of the mess she'd created. But what could she possibly say at this point? When her sobs finally started to quiet down, she wiped her face and looked up at me, eyes red and swollen. "Please," she whispered, her voice so broken it almost didn't sound like her. "We can fix this." That word again. Fix. Like we were talking about a leaky faucet or a flat tire. Like what she'd done was some simple mistake that a little effort could mend. The anger flared up inside me again, but I forced it down. I wasn't going to lose it. Not now. "You don't get it," I said, my voice cold. "There's no fixing this. What you did, it's not something we can come back from." "I love you," she said, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You love me? You had an affair with my brother, Sarah. 4 months. Do you even know what that did to me? Do you have any idea what it's like to hear your wife admit that she's been sneaking around with your own flesh and blood? And now you want to sit there and tell me you love me?" She flinched, her eyes filling with tears again. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "I wasn't trying to destroy us." "You didn't have to try," I snapped. "You did it anyway." She started crying again, but I wasn't moved. I'd heard enough of her apologies. They meant nothing now. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm filing for divorce," I said. "I already talked to a lawyer." Her head snapped up, the shock and fear clear on her face. "No," she whispered. "You don't have to do that. We can go to counseling, we can talk this out. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." "There's no right anymore," I said flatly. "This isn't something therapy can fix. You broke us, Sarah. You and Michael both. And there's no coming back from that." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't do this. I'm sorry. I'll never see him again. I'll do anything." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I was so tired. Tired of the lies, tired of the excuses, tired of the mess that my life had turned into in just a matter of days. "You don't get it," I said again, my voice quieter this time. "It's not about what you do now. It's about what you already did. I can't stay married to you after this." She broke down again, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. I turned away from her, staring at the wall, trying to block out the sound. I didn't want to be in this house anymore. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, suffocating me. Everything about it reminded me of the life we used to have, the life I thought we had, and how quickly it all fell apart. "I love you," she sobbed again. "Please, don't leave me." I turned back to face her, my expression hard. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You made your choice, Sarah. Now, I'm making mine." She wiped her face, her eyes wide and desperate. "It was a mistake," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I didn't mean for it to happen." "I'm tired of hearing that," I said, my patience wearing thin. "You didn't mean for it to happen? You didn't mean to keep seeing him for months? Stop lying to yourself. You made a choice, over and over again." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "I know," she said, her voice small. "I know I hurt you. I know I messed up. But please, don't throw everything away because of this. We can rebuild. I'll do whatever it takes." I shook my head slowly. "There's nothing left to rebuild, Sarah. I don't trust you anymore. How can I? You've been lying to my face for months. And not just to me, Michael's wife, your family. Everyone. Do you think I can just forget about that?" "I'll earn your trust back," she said quickly, her hands reaching out toward me, but I stepped back before she could touch me. "Don't," I warned, my voice cold. "Don't act like this is something you can fix with time and promises. It's not." She stared at me, her eyes wide and pleading. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "I can't." "You already did," I said quietly. "The moment you chose him over me." She opened her mouth to say something else, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I'm done talking about this," I said. "I'll be filing the papers tomorrow. I'll be staying at a hotel for a few days while I figure out my next steps. I'll come back for my things when you're not here." "Please," she whispered one last time, but I shook my head and turned toward the door. I walked out without looking back, the sound of her sobbing fading as the door clicked shut behind me. The weight of the decision settled over me as I stood in the driveway, taking a deep breath. I'd thought about it over and over since the moment she confessed, and each time, the conclusion was the same. There was no salvaging this. Not after everything that had happened. Not after what she'd done. I got into the car and drove to the hotel, my mind a mess of emotions I didn't even know how to begin sorting through. Anger. Hurt. Betrayal. But mostly, exhaustion. I was tired of fighting, tired of feeling like my life was spinning out of control. I just wanted it to be over. The next few days were a blur of legal consultations, phone calls, and logistics. I met with my lawyer, filed for divorce, and made arrangements to move my things out of the house. I didn't see Sarah again after that last conversation. I couldn't bring myself to face her. Not yet, anyway. Michael tried calling me a few times, but I ignored his calls. I had nothing left to say to him. As far as I was concerned, he didn't exist anymore. I didn't care how he was dealing with the fallout of his marriage. I didn't care what he thought about what I was doing. He had no place in my life now. A few days after I filed the papers, Sarah finally called. I let it go to voicemail at first, but after a few minutes, I played the message, her voice soft and broken as she begged me to reconsider. She'd received the divorce papers that morning, and the reality of it was hitting her hard. She cried through most of the message, apologizing over and over, telling me she'd never stop loving me. I didn't call her back. I couldn't. I had made my decision, and no amount of pleading or promises was going to change that. The damage was done, and there was no undoing it. The following week, I went back to the house while Sarah was at work. I didn't want another confrontation. I just wanted to grab what I needed and get out. It felt strange walking through the front door, like I was stepping into someone else's life. The house was eerily quiet, the way it always had been after I came home from a long day at work, but now, it felt empty. Hollow. The warmth that once filled the space was gone, replaced by the cold reality of what our marriage had become. I packed up my clothes, some personal items, a few things I wanted to keep. I didn't bother with anything sentimental, no photos, no keepsakes. Those things didn't matter to me anymore. They were just reminders of the life I thought I had, the life that didn't exist anymore. As I was packing up the last of my things, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw it was a message from Amy. "Thank you. I filed for divorce. It's over." I stared at the words for a moment, feeling a strange sense of relief. It wasn't just me. Amy had made her decision too. We were both walking away from the wreckage Michael and Sarah had caused, leaving them to deal with the consequences of their actions. I put my phone back in my pocket, grabbed my bags, and walked out of the house for the last time. There was no sadness, no nostalgia as I closed the door behind me. Just a sense of finality. This chapter of my life was over. Walking out of that house for the last time didn't feel like the end. It felt more like a strange limbo, like I was somewhere between the life I used to know and the life I was trying to build from the wreckage. There was no satisfaction, no relief. Just emptiness. I kept waiting for the moment when it would hit me, when the weight of everything that had happened would come crashing down and I'd break, but that moment never came. Maybe I'd been too angry for too long. Maybe the betrayal had burned out whatever grief I might have felt. Or maybe I just didn't care enough anymore. All I knew was that the life I'd been living was over, and now, I had to figure out what the hell came next. I drove to the hotel I'd been staying at since leaving the house, my bags in the trunk, my head still spinning. The divorce process had started. Sarah was out of my life for good. Michael? He didn't exist to me anymore. That bridge had been burned beyond recognition, and there wasn't a single part of me that wanted to rebuild it. For the next few weeks, everything moved in slow motion. The legal process was brutal: meetings with lawyers, signing papers, splitting up assets. I didn't want anything from Sarah. I made that clear from the start. The house, the furniture, whatever crap we'd bought together over the years, none of it mattered to me anymore. I told my lawyer I wanted a clean break, no fights, no dragging it out in court. I just wanted it done. Sarah, surprisingly, didn't put up much of a fight. Maybe she was too guilty to argue, or maybe she just knew there was no point. We hadn't spoken since I walked out. The only communication we had was through our lawyers, and even that was minimal. She didn't try to fight for the house or demand alimony. It was almost like she wanted to erase everything as quickly as possible, like she couldn't stand the thought of having anything to do with me anymore. And honestly, I was fine with that. The less I had to deal with her, the better. As for Michael, I never spoke to him again. Not once. Amy followed through with her divorce, and from what I heard through mutual friends, Michael moved out of the house and had been staying with some friend from work. I didn't care where he went. He could disappear for all I cared. I wasn't interested in what happened to him after everything. Whatever mess he was dealing with now, he deserved it. I never checked in on Sarah, either. After the papers were signed and we were officially done, she was just gone. I had spent years of my life loving this woman, building a life with her, only for it all to dissolve in a matter of weeks. And once it was over, it was like she ceased to exist. I didn't think about her. I didn't wonder where she was or how she was handling it. I didn't care if she was sorry or if she regretted what she'd done. She was out of my life, and I planned to keep it that way. The real question, though, was what the hell was I supposed to do now? It's strange, going through the motions of life when everything you thought you knew has been ripped out from under you. For a long time, I felt like I was just floating. I'd go to work, come home to the small apartment I rented after leaving the hotel, and repeat the cycle the next day. Weekends came and went, but there was nothing to mark the time anymore. My old routines, the ones I had with Sarah, were gone. It was like I was living someone else's life, just waiting for something to change. But nothing changed. Not at first. I stopped talking to most of our old friends. It wasn't that I didn't want to see them, it's just that every time I did, I felt like they were looking at me differently, like I was some kind of fragile thing they didn't know how to handle. I knew they'd all heard what happened. You can't hide something like this in a circle of close friends. I could see the pity in their eyes, the way they carefully avoided mentioning Sarah or Michael, tiptoeing around the giant mess that had blown up in my life. I hated it. So, I pulled away. Stopped answering texts, stopped going to gatherings, stopped pretending like I could just slip back into the life I used to have. I couldn't. Everything felt different now, and I didn't want to pretend that it didn't. At first, the isolation was a relief. I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to fake smiles or pretend like I wasn't still pissed off about everything. I didn't have to be reminded of the life I'd lost. But after a while, the silence started to weigh on me. It was one thing to pull away from the people who knew me, but it was another thing entirely to be alone with my own thoughts, day after day, with nothing but the echo of Sarah's betrayal ringing in my ears. I tried distracting myself. Threw myself into work, took on extra projects, stayed late at the office just so I didn't have to go back to that empty apartment. But even that only worked for so long. You can only bury yourself in work for so many hours before the thoughts catch up with you. About 2 months after everything had gone down, I got a call from Amy. I hadn't spoken to her since the night I told her about Michael. I figured she needed space, and I didn't want to drag her through any more of the mess. But when she called, I answered. "Hey," she said, her voice tentative. "Hey," I replied, unsure of what to say. There was a long pause on her end, like she was trying to figure out how to start. "I just wanted to see how you're doing," she finally said. "It's been a while." "Yeah," I said. "I'm getting by. Same, she said softly. Another long pause. I filed the final papers last week. Me too, I replied. It's all done. Neither of us said anything for a moment, the weight of everything hanging between us. Then she cleared her throat. Do you want to grab a drink? Talk? For a second, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I wanted to dig all of that up again. But then I realized who else could understand what I'd been through better than Amy. We were both collateral damage in the same mess, and maybe, just maybe, talking to her would be a relief. Yeah, I said. I'd like that. We met up at a quiet bar downtown, the same one where I told her the truth about Michael. It felt strange, walking in there again, but this time, there was no heavy weight hanging over me. I wasn't coming here to deliver bad news or rip someone's life apart. I was just talking. When Amy walked in, I saw the same exhaustion in her eyes that I'd been carrying for months. But there was something else there too, a sense of determination. Like she'd decided she wasn't going to let this define her. I respected that. We ordered drinks and sat in the corner booth, talking about everything and nothing. At first, we kept it like work, life, whatever we'd been doing to keep ourselves distracted. But eventually, the conversation drifted back to Michael and Sarah, as I knew it would. I thought I was over it, Amy said, swirling the wine in her glass. But some days, it just hits me. Out of nowhere. Like, how could they do this to us? I know, I said quietly. I keep replaying it in my head, trying to figure out how it got to that point. Like, were there signs? Did I miss something? Amy nodded. Same. I keep wondering if I should have seen it coming. If I should have done something differently. But the truth is, they made their choices. It wasn't on us. She was right. As much as I wanted to blame myself, to think maybe I could have prevented it, the reality was simple. Sarah and Michael had made their decisions. They chose to betray us. They chose to destroy everything. And now, we were left to pick up the pieces. I'm trying to move on, Amy said, offering me a small, sad smile. But some days, it feels impossible. It does, I agreed. But I guess that's all we can do. Just keep moving. We sat in silence for a while after that, sipping our drinks, lost in thought. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel completely alone. Amy understood. She'd been through the same hell, and somehow, we were both still standing. The months that followed were slow, but they weren't all bad. I started to rebuild, piece by piece, figuring out what my life looked like without Sarah in it. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the anger flared up again, days when I wondered if I'd ever really get over it. But as time went on, those days became fewer and fewer. I started going out again, reconnecting with friends I'd pulled away from. I even went on a few dates, though nothing serious. I wasn't ready for anything like that yet. But it felt good to start living again, to remind myself that there was life beyond the mess Sarah and Michael had left behind. Amy and I kept in touch. We weren't close, not really, but we checked in on each other every now and then. A drink here, a text there. It was nice to have someone who understood, even if we were both still figuring out what came next. And eventually, I did start to figure it out. It wasn't some big, dramatic realization. It was slow, gradual. But one day, I woke up and realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't thinking about Sarah or Michael. I was just me. That's what I'd learned, I guess. That no matter how much people betray you, no matter how much they take from you, they can't take everything. They can't take who you are, what you're capable of, what you can rebuild. And that's what I was doing, rebuilding. Was it easy? No. But I wasn't looking for easy anymore. I was just looking for real. And finally, I think I found it.